Our next vignette, if you will, of the life of Moses is now he is a young man, and we're still in Exodus chapter 2 in verses 11 through 22, if you want to read that passage in your Bible. And it says he went out to his people, and it's interesting. It describes the Israelites, the enslaved people, as his people. So, and he saw their forced labor, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and he looked around to see if the coast was clear, basically, and he intervened to the point where he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. And then a little later on, when he saw two Hebrews fighting with each other, and he again tried to intervene. And one of them said, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" And Moses was then really afraid because obviously people knew, and he didn't want to get thrown into jail. And so he flees from Pharaoh's land, from Egypt, and he ends up settling in the land of Midian. And some of us are old enough to have seen the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. I think many of us, if I were to ask people, what's the first thing you think of with Moses? I think many people wouldn't say the Ten Commandments. They'd say Charlton Heston in the movie The Ten Commandments. But you remember that scene where he flees across the desert, and then he ends up helping the daughters of Jethro at their well and feeding their flocks. And this is part of a transition point for him. And he ends up marrying Zipporah. And the verse for the day that I selected were, "But some shepherds came and drove them away. Moses got up and came to their defense and watered their flock." And one of the things I just want to point out in these first couple vignettes of Moses is he's coming to people's defense, right? So he comes to the defense of the Hebrew being beaten by the Egyptian. He comes to the defense of when he sees two people in conflict. He comes to the defense of Jethro's daughters at the well. He's someone who has both the heart and compassion for people who are kind of on the downside. And he also has the courage to intervene, because it's not easy to intervene and put yourself at risk. So we see in this passage today both Moses' compassion and his courage, two virtues we see throughout the Bible that we're going to see in Moses' life repeatedly. So in our own lives, what can we take from today's passage? Well, how can you and I show compassion and courage today? How can we help when we see somebody who's on the downside, who may be vulnerable, who may be being taken advantage of, being hurt? How can we be an advocate and a support to them, as Moses was to the daughters of Jethro? You may not get a spouse out of it like Moses got a wife, but I think God is always with us when we intervene and advocate for those who are hurting.